I'm so excited because this is a great story. Like, of course, I say that all the time. I only do stories that I really, really like, but this one is, I remember from when I was a kid, because it was written even before I was born. It was written by a man named Robert McCloskey. I actually have a book. I just got it. I've had this story for a long time, but I didn't have this collection. Robert McCloskey was born in 1914, and he always wanted to be an artist. And he was kind of told that maybe that wasn't a great idea. That's not a great way to make a living. But he persevered, and and his parents did support him, bless them. He lived in a little town in Ohio called Cedarburg. So if there's any Cedarburgians out there, a lot of his stories are based in a small town. And also a lot of his stories are based in and around where he eventually moved, which was an island in Maine. He only wrote 8 stories. 8, that's 8 right here, 8. And the number 8 is particularly important in the story we're going to tell today. And they were all extraordinarily acclaimed, every single one of them. He won Caldecott Awards for his artwork and for his stories. He always said that he had the art first and the story came later. And the one we're going to tell is actually, he had read about happening, because he also lived in Boston for a little bit of a while, and he had read about it happening. And if you happen to be in and around Boston, you can even see a beautiful sculpture that was given to the city of Boston in honor of this great story. And then there is one more sculpture just like it. It's in Moscow, and they love this story so much that McCloskey flew there and installed this same sculpture. And the story is called Make Way for the Ducklings. So how do you tell Make Way for the Ducklings? You could tell it using rubber duckies. I counted all the ones I have. They're over my left shoulder. I didn't have enough, but you could tell a story. That would be fun to do. And you could make some ducks. So what do you make ducks out of? Well, I personally do not like to clean my house. It's not that it's dirty. It's just not a task I like. It's a necessary task. It's not bad. Put on loud music. I could do just about anything. And I don't like to dust with these, but I have a wild and crazy collection of them. So you could make ducks out of feather dusters. And I have a lot of them. But then I thought to myself, how do I hold on to 10 feather dusters at the same time? Remember, the operative number in the story is 8. 8 ducklings is what we're getting towards. And then there's the mama duck and the papa duck. The papa duck is Mr. Mallard. And in this particular story, Mrs. Mallard's name must be Mrs., because that's what she's called, Mrs. Mallard. We're going to call her Mrs. Mallard because that's what McCloskey did. And for today, we're going to honor his story. I might want to rename her. So maybe we'll call her Marilyn. That would be cool, to be named after a duck. So another way to make a duck puppet is out of something we're going to look at right now. It's a little fancy, but I brought them for you because it's how we're going to start our story. And they are made out of bats and balls. And in the first time I told this story, I used sponge bats. This is the back of the duck, and a sponge ball to make her head. That also enables her to chit-chat, but all she really says is quack, quack. So now, and she has a scarf because she likes to keep her feathers in place, don't you know? And then, of course, wings. And most of the time, and the cool part about this kind of puppet is it's very lightweight, and you can use it anywhere. When I first did it, oddly enough, I had a little red wagon. I love Little Red Wagon. And I made it so that I could have all the ducks in a row in that red wagon propped up. But it was really cumbersome. And I want you to be able to tell this story. So for today, I have designed a carrying case, 2 actually, and a duck to make. So keeping your rubber ducky in the place they belong. The bathtub. and your baseball and your bat in the field, although we're going to start our story like that, we're going to take a handy dandy ever-present object called a paper, whoops, there, just a plastic paper, excuse me, paper, plastic. I had them all here. Where are they? A spoon, a plastic spoon. And the way we're going to, oh, I know where I did it. I put it in my handy dandy ever-present case. Now, doesn't it seem appropriate that if you're going to hatch 8 ducklings, they might be easily carried in this incredible container, which of course could also be, in another way, an alligator, but we don't have an alligator in our story. Today, we have ducklings. So, plastic spoon or a wooden spoon. I happen to have wooden ones. I just grabbed what I had. You could even use temporarily, if you ask permission, or you're the one who gives permission, a regular spoon, the kind you eat with and don't destroy but wash. Not a bad thing to do. The first thing we're going to do is figure out what our duck looks like. Model of duck. It has a head, it has a tail, and that should pretty much give the idea of what a duck needs to be, right? So what I'm going to do is take, I found these in a drawer. They're just circles. I'm going to take a couple and show you what you might do easily to make our 8 ducklings. First thing we're going to do is fold one in half. Okay, now look at it. What does it have? Thank you for modeling for me. Black. It has a tail. So what I'm going to do, easy as can be, is just put this up here because our puppet needs to be moved. And the stick is going to be the mover of the puppet. And again, for quick and easy, I'm going to use Scotch tape because that will hold our duck's body to our carrying. Our carrier, remember, is the stick. Now, if you do not have these, I don't even know where I got them, so I can't tell you. Just make some circles. Take a safe can, make a circle around it, cut out some paper. If you don't want to do that, you know what you can also use? Just the spoon. Quack. Works just fine. Now, what about a face? I'm going to just fold, before we do that, a feather up here so you can have a better view of a butt. There's the butt, right? And then I'm going to take another color. What do you think? Oh, about, boring. We're going to make it a little bit more interesting today. So I'm going for a bright green one. Here it is. Now, we're going to do it. This one is, I'm going to cut it just a little bit. You don't have to, but if you cut it just a little tiny bit, what you're going to want is a beak because it's bird. So if you cut a little piece like that, I'll show you what I'm doing. Now you, because it's your puppet, are going to do it exactly as you want, right? So now we have actually, which could be the duck all by itself. We're going to put this beak up here, like that. And then we're going to take another piece of Scotch tape. That's what we're going to do. And tape it on so we don't lose his head in the middle of our story. Wow. How do I know which way it's going? So glad you asked. Needs eyeballs. So if this is the duck tail, and this is the front, and that's his beak, you just have to put a little, I wonder when I stare at it, if I look kind of weird, huh? A little bit of a dot right there. Now we can see where our duck is going. Now you can get kind of fancy. Excuse me, itchy nose. You can make a wing on it. I'll show you what I did over there. Or you can leave it be. Or, you know what? You can do whatever you want. You're a duck. So I have made a few of these. And what we have to do first is I need to tell you what happened in this story. What I think this Robert McCloskey did that made it so incredible was he helped us learn the alphabet. And he must have figured it out all by himself because I didn't figure it out until I was reading the story and telling it for a long way how to remember. So you can make a nest out of one of these, plate and a half, so that the ducks can live in there until you need them, or even be hatched in there. Or you can do, with your clever handy dandy ever egg carton, you can turn it after they're born. We're going to have them born in here. You can turn it upside down and just stick them in here, because our ducks need to be on an adventure, and they all need to move together. So we're going to end that way, but we're going to start in here. So let me repeat. We need 8 of these. And how are we ever going to remember their names? Because when they're born, they get names. So I'm going to give you a clue by writing the last 3 letters of all of their names on this nest. Okay? The first letter in our clue is the letter A, followed by the letter C, followed by the letter K. Now, I'm going to leave that underline, fill in the blank. And what's that word? Ack. Ack. So remember ack. Now, you and I together are going to name all those characters. Ready, set? So we will remember as we do it. These are the ones that I made before. And I'm going to make them so you can see them. And I'm going to put their first initial on their bodies. So the first one's name is Jack. And you got this, right? The second one's name is Cat. K for cat. And you'll know why McCloskey did it this way when you figure out how he ends the story of their names. And the third one's name is, you got it, Lack, L-A-C-K. And the fourth one's name is Mac, kind of like Marilyn. Mac. And the fifth one's name is, this fifth one didn't want to come up. It's a little harder to say, but I think you can do it. Or maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just me. Knack. Oh, the sixth one's name is, maybe this is the one that's hard to say. Ooh-ack. Ooh-ack. And the last one's name, get ready, because you know this one. And this is why I think Robert McCloskey did it this way. The last one's name, the eighth one's name is Quack. Whew. All right, I think we got it. So let's just do that together. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. After the letter I, we start our story with their names. So the first one's name we know is Jack, Cack, Lack, Mac, Knack, Ooack, Pack, and Quack, just like a duck says. And here's how our story goes. Once upon a time, Mr. and Mrs. Mallard are looking for the perfect place to live. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were about to start a family, and as we know, a family should be well taken care of. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard flew all over Boston, where they lived, looking for the perfect place. Just when Mr. Mallard had thought he had found the perfect place, on the top of a house, he discovered that it had a pitched roof. And they slid down. So Mr. and Mrs. Mallard continued on their search. They looked everywhere. They wanted a place that was quiet, but they also wanted a place that was within reach for them to start a family, so that Mrs. Mallard could sit on the eggs in the nest, and Mr. Mallard could easily go and find something for them to eat. For once Mrs. Mallard sat on the nest, she didn't move but kept them warm and safe. So one day, while they were just about ready to start building their nest, they flew down into Boston Commons and saw a beautiful park. And they sat right down in the middle of an island. And that would have been good, except the traffic with the swan boats was way too busy. So Mr. Mallard and Mrs. Mallard decided, this is not a good place to raise our family. And off they went. Now, pretty soon, Mrs. Mallard said, it's really time for us to settle down. So they found another spot right in the middle of the park, and there Mrs. Mallard sat on the nest, laid the eggs, and Mr. Mallard went out, bringing her something to eat, taking care of her and his soon-to-be family. And so it went. Mrs. Mallard laid not one, not two, not three, or four, or five, or six, or seven, but 8 eggs. And one day, while Mr. Mallard was out, a most amazing thing happened. Those eggs began to hatch. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were so excited, but Mr. Mallard came back rather slowly. Well, the first one who popped out was Jack. Mrs. Mallard set Jack down into the nest. Following Jack came Cack, and following Cack came Lack, and following Lack came Mac, and following Mac came Knack, and following Knack came Uack, and following Uack came Pack. Oops, Pack just ran away. Oh, Pack. And following Pack came Quack. Now, Quack was a bit of a problem. He was always going in the wrong direction, but he got it eventually. Now, Mrs. Mallard and Mr. Mallard taught all of their ducklings what to do. And what did they do? First, they taught them to swim, which is very important if you live in the middle of a pond. And so they did. They learned to swim. And then, of course, she taught them how to walk. One day on a walk, Mrs. Mallard introduced them to Officer Mike. Officer Mike was in charge of the garden and the pond in the middle of Boston. He made sure everyone was very safe, but he also was very fond of ducks. So he fed them, each and every one of them, especially Quack, who, even though he seemed to always want to go in the wrong direction, eventually caught up. Now, our friend Quack ate as much as they could until finally they got a little bit too big. So I'm going to tell you what happens next. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard had a meeting, and they decided that they needed to leave this tiny little pond to teach their children how to get on in the world. And so they did. But it wasn't so easy, because in the middle of Boston, they have this thing called traffic. Now, how are ducklings supposed to walk across a crowded road? And I want you to imagine how busy a street in the middle of Boston is. Everybody goes down the street, not just cars and buses, but bikes, skaters, even people on motorcycles. This is no way for a duck to cross the street. So the first thing to happen after he had said goodbye to his family temporarily, goodbye, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mac, Knack, Uack, Pack, and Quack, I am going to find us the perfect place to live. So off he flew. And he did. All the way across the way into a park, Mr. Mallard found the perfect place. He quickly flew home to the place where the ducklings nested with their mother. Mr. Mallard and Mrs. Mallard had a meeting. Mr. Mallard said, "Mama," and she said, "Yes, dear, I am going to show you our new home." Oh, Mrs. Mallard was a little concerned, because after all, how could they possibly get across the street? Now, you must remember that Mr. Mallard and Mrs. Mallard had introduced their children to Mr. Mike, who the crossing, the protector of the park. And they said, "No, don't you worry. I will ask Mike if he can help us cross the street." And so off flew Mr. Mallard, who landed right in front of Officer Mike, played by puppeteer Marilyn. "What can I do for you, my friend?" "Quack, quack, 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 quack." "You want me to help your children, your ducklings, cross the street?" "Oh, I don't know. It's such a busy street. Look at that traffic. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. How are we ever going to cross?" "Oh, but you need to leave the park so they can grow big and be independent." "Quack, quack." "Oh, all right. Well, let me see what I can do." The first thing Mike, the patrolman, did was he called some of his colleagues, and they gathered around and decided that maybe they could stop traffic for those 8 ducklings: Jack, Cack, Lack, Knack, Mack, Ooack, Pack, and Quack. And they decided that that would be an okay thing to do. So Officer Mike blew his whistle, and he motioned for Mr. Mallard to stand on one side of the street and Mrs. Mallard to stand on the other with her ducklings right behind. And so she did. At the count of 8, first went Mrs. Mallard. Oop, then she changed her mind. "That's no way to cross the street. First, I have to look both ways." And she did. She looked to the right, she looked to the left, she even looked up, and she even looked down. And then she stood behind her ducklings while Papa Mallard looked on the other side. Officer Mike blew the whistle, put up his hand, and stopped the traffic. And our ducklings, one at a time, carefully crossed the road. The first one across was our friend Jack, followed by Cack, followed by Lack. Just looking back to see if Mama was still there. Followed by Mac. There she is. Followed by Knack. Slower than the rest. Followed by Ooack. Followed by Pack. Followed by Quack. Once Quack got safely to the other side, Mama Mallard thanked Officer Mike. "Quack, quack. You're welcome." And off she went to join Papa Mallard and her 8 ducklings. Now the rumor has it that Mama and Papa Mallard, with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Ooack, Pack, and Quack, lived quite comfortably until they grew up big enough so that they could go out into the world and raise ducklings of their own. And that, of course, is exactly what happened. Special round of applause for all of those people who help us guide our way, who help us cross the street. I live across the street from the school, and down the road from me is my friend Dorothy, and she helps all the boys and girls start their way off with a smile and a safe crossing. So I wish you, in the name of Robert McCloskey, who wrote 8 good books, a pleasant day of careful walking and living happily ever after. And that is exactly the truth.